Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for joining us this morning's very special lecture on international financial system and financial crisis. We are very fortunate to have a special guest speaker this morning who is the authority in the fields. I'm not alone to say this. I will just quote Neil Ferguson, who is a very renowned historian who wrote so much about economic financial history himself. You know, he commented on her very famous book, which was bestseller, New York Times bestseller, titled "This Time is Different." Neil said, let me quote, "This is quite simply the best empirical investigation of financial crisis ever published, period." And then he went on to say that this single volume is worth 1,000 mathematical models. That's what Neil Ferguson said. We are very, very fortunate to have Professor Carmen Reinhart this morning. Actually, she happened to be in town to attend a meeting at the Bank of Korea, and she gave a keynote address yesterday. I'm sure some of you must have seen what she said yesterday through media. Well, since she was in town, we invited her, and she gladly accepted. Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning. And I don't think I'll waste any more time, and we'll have Chairman Chun proceed the meeting. Please join me again thanking Professor Reinhart.
Thank you, Dr. Sagong. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, welcome to IG Forum this morning. We are very fortunate to have truly outstanding speaker, Professor Carmen Reinhart, as our special guest at our forum this morning. As you know, IEG has a long tradition of inviting global leaders to its distinguished lecture series. But I think this time is different. I say this because we are so very excited about having Professor Reinhart, who is truly exceptional and influential scholar of our time. She will talk about a very timely issue of international financial architecture today. Before we invite Professor Reinhart to the podium, allow me to say a few words about her exceptional credentials. Professor Reinhart is currently chair professor of the International Financial System at Harvard Kennedy School. Previously, she was a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, chief economist at Bear Stearns, and senior policy advisor as well as deputy director at IMF. I had the pleasure overlapping my time at the bank with Carmen's days at the fund in Washington. As Dr. Sagong said just before, Professor Reinhart is perhaps best known for her bestseller book entitled "This Time is Different: 8 Centuries of Financial Folly," which greatly contributed to the understanding of financial crisis in both advanced economies and emerging markets. It has been translated to over 20 languages, Korean, of course, included, and won the prestigious Paul A. Samuelson Award. She received her PhD from Columbia University. Without further ado, let's welcome Professor Reinhart. She will speak for about 35-40 minutes, followed by 20 minutes Q&A. Thank you.
It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. And I have hoped that my coverage of topics, which is on global risks, is appropriate to the current environment, the current concerns. So what I would like to do is basically do a global tour of what some of the major risks. I won't be covering all the potential risks, but I'll try to hit on the major topics, and especially those that have international spillovers. I'll divide or organize my thoughts into some of the risks that are emanating from the advanced economies, some of the risks that are emanating from emerging markets, obviously, and most importantly, including China. And then I will talk a little bit about some of the longer-term concerns I have about the financial architecture, which currency will be the anchor currency, the reserve currency. So that's my game plan this morning. And let me start by saying that I am not of the gloom and doom variety. My expectation up until very recently this year was not that, for example, the United States would be heading into a recession later in this year. My expectation, and I think it is soundly based on the available indicators, was to expect a slowdown. As you probably know, growth has been in the US a little above 3%, so the expectation was for a slowdown to the slightly above 2% area, but not recession. Let me also say that in the last couple of weeks, all the shocks that we get from the White House have been adverse. So it is difficult not to highlight that whatever risks there are to the outlook are likely to be risks on the downside rather than the upside. I'm just providing a setting of what my baseline is. The other component of my baseline was, as you, especially those of you in the financial markets, the financial industry know, there is the expectation that the Federal Reserve would lower interest rates one more time in 2018. There's expectations that the Federal Reserve would reduce interest rates by 25 basis points. That also had not been my expectation. My expectation was basically that the Federal Reserve would be patient and that U.S. interest rates would remain unchanged. The basis, very briefly, for that expectation is that, as I shall discuss, the U.S. economy is at present at or very near full employment. The unemployment rate is the lowest it's been since the 1960s. So unless something really negative evolves, I think the Federal Reserve policy is likely to be one of patience. Now I've laid out hopefully what my baseline scenario is. Now I'm going to talk about the individual risks that I see. First of all, in the more immediate period, meaning 2020 and the near term, before I get to the long-term risks. So one common theme that I'm going to return to, and I'm going to return to this when I also speak of China in talking about emerging markets, is the issue of how much ammunition do governments and central banks in the advanced economies have if there is another downturn. And that's going to be my starting point. And let me start with fiscal policy. What I'm showing in this chart is government debt, public debt, from 1900 to the present, to the end of 2018, for 22 advanced economies. The black line is the United States. Let me offer 3 takeaways from this picture. Overall, the picture is one in which advanced economies have very high levels of debt, the highest levels of debt since the end of World War II. And this raises questions about how much fiscal space there is to deal with the downturn. At the end, when all is said and told, when the crisis of 2008-2009 unfolded, advanced economies were not in wonderful shape, but certainly they were in much better conditions to react strongly to a downturn